Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Shannon Harwood has been formerly employed as a lived experience peer in the Tasmanian Public Health Services and is currently working in research and project coordination at the University of Tasmania. As well as engaging in direct peer practice, she is passionate about promoting the development of the lived experience workforce. Shannon's other fields of interest are metabolic psychiatry and lifestyle mental health care, having managed her own bipolar disorder with lifestyle modifications and a ketogenic diet. Shannon used ketogenic therapy to put her own bipolar disorder fully into remission without the need for medications. Since then, she has applied her peer support qualifications through her ketogenic and recovery coaching business called Mindbody Coaching and contributes to live experience research. Recently, she has been the recipient of the 2024 Fresh Start Award, which includes a $10,000 grant to promote metabolic psychiatry given out by the nonprofit Metabolic Mind. With the Fresh Start Award, she plans to enhance the tools she uses in her coaching practice, attend conferences and webinars, and expand her professional networks. Shannon Harwood, now an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me to come along. I could talk about metabolic psychiatry from now until the end of this next year. Thank you so much.
Great. I'm just going to put myself on mute and you can just talk about metabolic psychiatry this whole time. It's such an amazing topic. And to think that it's not new, we've had research in this field for a while and Dr. Georgia Ead's been in the field for a while and Dr. Chris Palmer has been in the field for a while, but it just really seems like in the last 2 or 3 years, it is just completely ramped up. And so many of our episodes that we do are about metabolic psychiatry, not only because I'm trying to chase down all of you who won the Fresh Start Award, which is absolutely amazing, but it's so important. And the research is incredible that's coming out and the stories you get are incredible. If you'd have gone back to when I started this podcast and asked me if I thought we would have done as many episodes about mental health, I would have laughed you out of the room. I would have said absolutely no way. And we talk about it all the time now. It's incredible.
Well, and if you had have told me that I was going to be on a podcast about mental health, let alone you doing podcasts about mental health, I would never have believed it. I don't even have a social media profile, and yet here I am, compelled to give interviews on podcasts to talk about my story and to share it because I was very, very lucky to stumble across metabolic psychiatry, and I feel now that the one thing that I can do is to use my story to tell people about what has happened to me and what has happened to others, so that they can give it a go if they want to. It's the start of a new year, a good time to be starting something new, and certainly having a look. People look at diet and health in the New Year's resolutions. Well, I'd say have a look at mental health, and maybe we can link that up with diet and health more generally, and especially along the lines of ketogenic therapy. Great time in the new year, and yeah, great time to be talking about it again.
Well, that is fantastic. I couldn't agree more. And it's funny to think that not only changing your diet this time of year be really great for the physical body and, great for all the elements that we know that a ketogenic diet can really tackle, but also at the same time, it can improve your mental health by so much. I mean, I'm more in the strict carnivore side of things, primarily because of the way I react to things that give me anxiety. Like my anxiety dropped right out when I started carnivore, and that's a primary motivator. I do it for other reasons, of course, but that's the big thing for me is the mental health component. And to think that yes, I get that, but also all these other amazing side benefits as well. It's quite cool to contemplate that you can do all of that when you're eating what I would argue is the best diet for us as a species. It might not work for everybody, but it sure seems to work for a lot of people, including yourself.
It has. Changing my diet has been an amazing tool for dealing with my mental health. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about the carnivore diet too. And Georgia Ead, who's a psychiatrist working in the field of metabolic psychiatry, talks about a sliding scale from, so for example, if you were drinking lots of sugary soft drinks and you just cut out that main source of carbs, that may well do you good. If you go a little bit further and you go towards a paleo diet, cutting out some more carbs, that may do you good. If you're like me and you have bipolar disorder type 2, maybe you want to go as far as a ketogenic diet and that virtually, very little amount of carbs. Or then again, you can go the further step and go a carnivore diet, again, limiting the carbs. And where you are on that sliding scale from a sad standard American diet all the way through to carnivore, my personal belief is that if you limit your carbohydrate to some extent, and that means, eating fruit, veg, meat, whole foods, then I think your health is going to benefit for that. For me in particular, though, I ended up I was just eating a fairly normal diet, and I ended up on a ketogenic diet because I ended up looking at the field of epilepsy, because drugs used in bipolar disorder are epileptic drugs, which is how I heard about the ketogenic diet. So the ketogenic diet was where I started with this. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the way Georgia puts that. I'm really glad you brought that up because it makes it really accessible. Like I choose a more strict version of a carnivore diet. It's if nothing else, it's simple and I'm kind of lazy. So that's really nice for me. It's so easy to come up with. But you can get into this various different ways. I mean, even in Georgia's book, she talks about like it's harder if you're a vegetarian, but you can do it. And she explains how it can be done. So I love that it's really accessible that way. And regardless of what people like to eat, whether it's the same as me or you or anybody else, they can choose how they do it and usually have really great mental health. It is amazing that you found the ketogenic diet through epilepsy. We've known about this for over 100 years, and it's just an incredible story of how we started using, the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, and that fell out of favor as medications came. But I'm wondering, with your own story, your own personal story, how did the mental health troubles kind of begin for you in your life?
Well, for me, I had a fairly standard presentation of bipolar 2 in my life. So I was 15, 17 years old, and I started having bipolar symptoms come up. And they continued throughout my life. And I got a late diagnosis. I wasn't diagnosed. I did a lot of periods of withdrawal. There's a lot of very, very deep depressions, a lot of hypomania. It's a really, for me, it was a really difficult life. I didn't get qualifications. Relationships were affected by that. I withdrew a lot because I was just too unwell. I couldn't even make eye contact with people, Casey. I couldn't look at them. I was fighting off suicidality, and then when I was high in the hypomanias, I was a handful, quite frankly. I was a handful, and did some stupid stuff, and was very, very lucky to be, here. And I got diagnosed at 40, and I had kids by then, and that was a revelation, because I knew that I was eccentric and a little bit mad, but I didn't know I had a mental illness. It had been misdiagnosed as other things along the way. And so at 40, when I actually got diagnosed with bipolar 2, I hit the mainstream medical model, which I also hit a cascade of polypharmacy, lots and lots of medications to try and deal with that. And when I was diagnosed, and I sort of couldn't withdraw anymore because I had kids, so I had to look after the kids. My mantra became, how good can I get it? How good can I get it? Now I know what I'm tackling, what am I going to do? And so I set out with lifestyle choices alongside the medication. So my journey was always lifestyle interventions and medications at the same time. And when I say a cascade of polypharmacy, and just, you can edit this out if you don't want it in the show later, but it's funny, when I was unwell, I had doctors tell me that I would never be well, that I would be chronic, that I would never work full time, that my parenting would always be a problem, that I would always be on heavy sustained medication for the rest of my life. That's what I was told. And now that I'm well, I have doctors look at me and they go, oh, well, maybe you didn't really have bipolar. So I would just like to say this for the people listening: cariprazine, sodium valproate, lamotrigine, acenapine, risperidone, olanzapine, quetiapine, sertraline, fluoxetine, temazepam, diazepam, alprazolam, ketamine, 3 or 4 plus of those at any one time And on top of that, 1,350 milligrams of lithium daily for 10 years. I gave medication a red hot go. You don't get prescribed all of that unless you have what is known as severe mental illness, which is what bipolar 2 is known as. And that was hospitalizations and things along the way there as well. And you know what? None of it ever got rid of my bipolar disorder. So my lifestyle interventions and better use of medication towards the end, I got it to the point where I was managing and I was spending all my time, all my life, and all my energy managing. And I was still having episodes, but they weren't destroying my life anymore. I was able to hold down work, my parenting had improved, but I was still having episodes of unwellness. And all these medications, and some of them just weren't working. And I was on a medication called lamotrigine and I wanted to get off it. And, you know, when I went on it, nobody told me it would be difficult to get off. Heads up, that informed consent. Yeah, it was difficult to get off. And I couldn't get off this drug called lamotrigine. And I thought, what is this drug, this lamotrigine? What is it? So I started researching lamotrigine and I found out it was an epilepsy drug. And then I found out that quite a few bipolar meds are epilepsy drugs. And then I stumbled across an article that said when epilepsy drugs don't work, sometimes they use a ketogenic diet. And honestly, my jaw just went to the floor and I went, a ketogenic diet? I'm on 3 epilepsy meds and it's not working for bipolar. What is this diet? And then I just began. And I read and I read and I read, and I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I heard Ian Campbell say that he went on a ketogenic diet as a person with bipolar 2, and the lights went back on in his brain. And I just looked at that and thought, no. And besides, I like toast. You know, I really like toast and I like pasta, and I'm not even sure I can do it. But I just kept reading and the stories were really compelling. And I got to the point where I thought, I'm going to give this a go. So by that stage, I'd been heavily medicated for 10 years. I'd had bipolar for 35 years. And I began a ketogenic diet. A few days later, I was on some fairly heavy antipsychotics, so it probably took more than a few days, but maybe 5 days later, I was in ketosis. I felt my body swap into ketosis, and my whole world changed. And my world changed as soon as I moved into ketosis. But it took some months and some adaptations and some getting used to it and learning the diet and falling off. But, you know, from that moment where my world changed, you know, fast forward, I've done 3 years of tapering meds. I'm completely non-medicated. I don't even consider I have bipolar disorder anymore. I simply have no symptoms to manage. I do no managing. My energy, my time, and my life is my own to do exactly what I want to do with it instead of managing bipolar.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Shannon, that is an incredible story. Thank you for sharing all of that. I did have some questions. As you mentioned before, you're not really on social media and you haven't done a ton of these interviews yet, but you were hosted on another one of our former guests. We're going to be dropping her episode soon. Donica, that episode will be out by the time this episode is out. And she hosted you on her show. And I'm curious to know, like, what is kind of the day to day or the cycles of hyper and hypo for somebody who doesn't know what bipolar type 2 is like. Let's start with, like, before you were medicated, having bipolar for as long as you did without a diagnosis. Like what are we talking? What's kind of like your day to day or week to week, or how you're experiencing the hypers and the hypos?
Well, I think one of the first things I did when I learned that I had bipolar and actually got a diagnosis, was and I would urge anybody who has bipolar 2, I don't know so much about bipolar 1, but bipolar 2 disorder, to get to know their own pattern of bipolar disorder. So it's not the same for everybody. So my personal pattern before medications, I would have, for me, I would always have hypomania before depression. So hypomania is an excess of energy. And, you know, I really like Chris Palmer's book, Brain Energy, because when I think about bipolar disorder itself as an energy disorder rather than a mood disorder, because when I was hypomanic, is this drive, this energy that just ran through you. What was sleep? Who needed sleep? Who needed food? I'll start a project. I'll start 10 projects. I might not finish them all, but I'll do it. I'm charming. Can we go out? Shall we have a party? What shall we do? You know, and just be alive and vivacious and filled. And it was glorious. I had these beautiful, beautiful highs. And as I said, I consider myself a madly eccentric, creative person. You know, I got into trouble. I ran amok in those highs, but I didn't think of it as illness. So I missed that. And then what would happen, and quite often when I was having a hypomanic episode, I'd do stupid things like, you know, I'd quit a job, perfectly good job, decide I was going to move on the spur of the moment. So when the hypomania wore off, I'd often done some damage to the structure of my life. And then I would fall into a depression. And I would sometimes think, you know, I'm depressed because, you know, now I'm unemployed, you know, because I quit my job for no reason. But it really wasn't as simple as that. And before I was diagnosed, I suppose my depressions outweighed the hypomania by a goodly amount. And I think that's because I had regret, sadness. I mean, I was sad about all the terrible things that I've done, as well as being and for people who don't know bipolar 2, you know, I would just lie on a couch with the curtains closed. I wouldn't go out. I'd have problems eating. You know, it's such a physical energy thing. You can be lying on a couch depressed, and I think to myself, you know, I really need to turn over because I'm a bit uncomfortable, and it would take me an hour to be able to turn onto my side, the impetus to actually to move. They used to call it with bipolar 2 leaden paralysis, was, you know, you just anyway, so does that answer the question? That was sort of the pattern. So I'll do it. Sorry, no, and that would go for, say, the hypomania and the depression. That would take about 3 months, and I'd have one of those every 18 months or 2 years, and that would be my pattern through to
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that
diagnosis.
sounds awful. I mean, what was the word you used in that interview? I believe it was like despair. And you described like it's not just emotional, it is physical. Like you described, like you almost like cinder blocks or something that you can't get out from under. It seems crippling.
It is. It is like I used to call this, for me, the despair of bipolar 2. I used to call it like a cosmic grief. It felt like grief. The poet Sylvia Plath called it a bell jar, because it was like being behind glass. It was like being completely and utterly separate from the world, from my children, even the ties of I love being a mum, but you know, there are no ties of love that can cross that glass barrier either. It's completely isolated and completely alone. And I think the phrase that you're thinking of, Casey, is, you know, despair is a place I used to go to live. It
Wow.
was just terrible. But, you know, I'm really quite a positive person. So then I get well again and I go, you know, and I'd seen professionals and psychologists and a psychiatrist, and they all said I had major depression disorder and I should do some CBT and learn to think more positively. And, you know, and then I get well and I'm like super positive, and here I am and I'm fine, you know. And I didn't think I had a problem with a positive attitude. It was just these cycles of, and bipolar 2 is a, you know, episodic illness for me. It became a lot more messy with the introduction of meds, and also I was able to limit the hypomanias with the introductions of meds. They were useful in that regard. But it is hard to overstate the difficulties and devastation that gives to a life well lived. And I thought that I was well between episodes. I now know what well is. Now I'm on a ketogenic diet. And even between episodes back then, I was still actually managing bipolar symptoms. I just didn't realize it. It affects every single part of you, but it's fairly easy to hide it from other people a lot of the time. So people don't see, the extent of it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, as I've gotten to interview all of you who've won this Fresh Start Award, I've really gotten to appreciate a lot more of how difficult it must be to revisit those times. So I appreciate you sharing that with us and being so vulnerable, and not the funnest thing to go back and think about, and all the trauma that people have suffered and the difficulties. It's just it's a lot. It's really heavy. So I appreciate you sharing that with others. And again, it sounds like it was kind of a mixed bag as far as the standard medical kind of procedure. You went in, I'm sure you probably didn't want to go on medications, but it must have seemed like the only thing. It seems like, with a lot of the psychiatrists, there are techniques and yeah, sure, different things that can certainly help. But if your brain is lacking energy, I don't think all those things are very likely to help anyway, or they're not going to make nearly as big of a difference as restoring the energy to the brain. So can you elaborate a little bit more about what your journey was like through the classical medical system before you found the ketogenic diet? Cut out again. Can't hear you. So weird.
Why?
I can at least hear you now. It's low.
Can you?
I can hear you.
What about now?
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
So my journey with the standard medical model there is, look, I'd just like to say this. I think if I'd been told straight up, look, we don't have something that's really going to help your bipolar fundamentally at root cause. What we have are some medications that you can use for symptom management. Now, I think if I'd have been told that straight up, just like that, I think my journey with medication would have been different. But when I got diagnosed, and doctors were saying, "We'll do this. I think this is going to make you better. We'll see if we can fix you and make you better." But the medication didn't really do that. And I felt like I was a guinea pig and just throwing one med and then it doesn't. And I understand that, if you're going to use medication, and if I was unwell again, I would definitely use medication. And I know what I would use now. I refined the process. But in the early days, I just felt like a guinea pig, and it was trying one after another, after another, after another. And even though more medications were added and symptoms weren't particularly improving, and I had a raft of terrible, terrible, terrible side effects, as the medications were being added, they weren't always being removed. So I ended up on a really heavy medication burden. And I thought, medications, these are powerful, powerful tools. But I'm a persistent sort of creature and I like to read, and I was curious. So when I was learning about bipolar disorder, I also learned about inflammation, so I started tracking my inflammation markers 12 years ago. My doctor thought that I was a little bit out there, I think. And also circadian rhythms. So I was looking at everything I could do for sort of circadian rhythm therapy of keeping my sleep and my light. And so I was doing lifestyle along the journey of medications at the same time. And for me, stress, because we're here because of metabolic psychiatry. So let's just talk about metabolic stuff for a moment. So stress is a trigger for a bipolar episode, but stress also affects metabolism. Stress will give you a cortisol spike. A cortisol spike will give you an insulin spike. This is a metabolic system. Even stress, when you talk about how you're going to deal with stress, and there's a million ways to deal with stress, choose the one that suits you best. So I did a lot of work on managing stress, on managing sleep, on managing light, on knowing my early warning systems of early warning signs. And I think now all those things are health promoting and a functioning metabolism. You know, if you're not, it's like when people are trying to lose weight, Casey, you know, people who want to try and lose weight, if they're not getting enough sleep, ooh, you're going to find it a lot harder to lose weight. That's just the way it is. And you can see the link with metabolism there. So, and sleep disorder is a big part of most people with bipolar 2. So nailing your sleep. So if you're listening to this in the new year and you think, I'm not sure about metabolic psychiatry, well, read away on metabolic psychiatry. And while you're reading away, just have a nip in on your sleep schedule and give yourself a bedtime. And you'll already be doing metabolic work as you are getting excited by the stories you hear in metabolic psychiatry.
Yeah, that's great advice. We're fortunate. I'm jealous of you that you're in the Southern Hemisphere right now and you're getting all the sunshine. But the one good thing going for us here in the Northern Hemisphere is it does get dark really, really early and it's very cold. So it is a little easier to get more sleep this time of year. So that's really nice. I think that's wonderful advice, paying attention to the rhythms and the timing of when we should be getting certain kinds of light and when we should not be getting certain kinds of light is so important. It's cool that it was part of your journey. It is still disappointing to know that, like, recommending a diet, suggesting a diet, it comes far after all these medications failing. So yeah, you describe finding the ketogenic diet and your jaw dropping to the ground, which of course it's interesting too, because even just a few months ago, Nicole Laurent told me a really cool thing to do is if you go to Google Scholar and you type in any study that has ketogenic, it will automatically, if you have the settings right, it'll automatically email you when a new study, a series of studies are published that has the word ketogenic in it. I'm like, that's cool. This will probably email me, every month, every other month or whatever. It's like every 2 or 3 days, there's a huge list of new studies with the word ketogenic in them. It's almost like annoying that I'm getting so many. I can't stay on top of them. And it's not new. These studies that we're doing now, we've been doing for a very long time. It's so disappointing that all of that kind of got lost and fell out of favor. And now it seems like you're nuts if you suggest that, yes, diet can definitely help your mental health.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we've known that for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, Meryl Streep was in the movie Do No Harm about a ketogenic diet
That's
for
right.
epilepsy. And if you extended that Google search and didn't just put ketogenic, but if you put in low carb and carnivore into that as well and opened it up to stories in everything from ketogenic diets for use in alcohol withdrawal, people hearing rheumatoid arthritis, sleep apnea. There's a common one with carnivore. When you get that low information, there's people just stop snoring, and the list goes on and on and on. And getting back to what I was saying before, if I'd have been told, look, medications are there for symptom management, but it's not a root cause healing. I mean, I went to look for root cause healing anyway, because I don't know, that's just the way I'm built. I'm a lifelong learner and I went and did it. But if the medical profession said, look, this is symptom management, but healing is possible, but it may come from outside of a packet of pills. But healing is possible. And the amount of hopelessness that is embedded in this system when we see people who don't get well off medication, and if you're a doctor or a nurse or someone in this system and that's your stock in trade a lot of the time, and people aren't getting well, you end up with this sense of, oh, well, people don't really get well. But in my land, in the land where those articles are coming to you, people are getting well, people are healing, and it's astonishing. I had 35 years of unremitting bipolar disorder that I couldn't hold down a full-time job, and here I am, and it's all completely gone. It is, and do I think that this will work for everybody? No, I don't, because I think mental distress can have a lot of different causes. For me, obviously, these metabolic pathways were a huge part of that, but it could have been a trauma pathway. It could have been all sorts of other things as well. So I don't think it'll work for everybody. But also, as you said, we're going back 100 years now on the science. So if a ketogenic diet was dangerous, yeah, we'd know that by now.
Yeah.
And there would have been, unfortunately, a lot of prematurely dead epileptic people, but there weren't prematurely dead epileptic people. What there were epileptic people controlling seizures, a major neurological condition, with a ketogenic diet. And I am changing major severe mental illness with a ketogenic diet. And
Incredible.
I just think everybody should just, if you've got steak, potato, and salad on your plate, take the potato off. It's not a revolution. The henny penny, the sky is not going to fall. Just, have bacon and eggs for breakfast and don't put the toast on the plate. And for the life of me, I do not understand why, because you're right, people put medications first in the med model and they say, oh, look after your diet and get some sleep. But honestly, that's about as far as the advice goes normally. Eat a healthy diet and get some sleep. But what do you mean by that? I mean, and I think if we took the weighting and turned it more towards those lifestyle things, and we could have some serious conversations about how you might like to intervene and make those changes in your diet. If people thought that healing was possible, but they knew that healing probably wasn't coming through their meds, symptom management, and even good symptom management can come through medication. But I think they'd be more motivated to go and look in other areas, because it'd be like it's like a grail, a road trip, a quest, isn't it? How good can I get it? I'm going to go and find out. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. Okay, well, let's talk about some of those lifestyle management changes. Let's start with the most important one, which I think you and I would both argue would be the diet, the ketogenic diet. What was your experience? It sounds like you were gung-ho and just really wanted to jump right in. What was your experience like? Was it terribly difficult? What challenges did you face? Practically speaking, was it weird to, buy new foods and try to prepare them? Like, what challenges did you yourself run into?
You're right. I did go gung ho. I jumped straight in. I did a lot of reading. I did a ton of reading, and I'd also back in the day worked as a cook and cooking in kitchens and things, and I've always cooked and baked. So I was very happy in the kitchen and around food and preparing food. So I had no problems with sort of recipes or coming up with food. So what I did was I went from a completely standard diet, coffee with 2 sugars a day, 4 coffees, there's 8 teaspoons of sugar there, all the sweet treats. I was completely carb addicted, completely food addicted. I've also resolved binge eating and food addiction with a ketogenic diet too, just as a way. But so I began and I went, okay, I'm going to eat less than 20 grams of carbs a day. So that's what I did from day one. If you're out there and you're listening, I would not recommend that as a strategy. I would just go a low carb ketogenic meal. I'd just replace them one by one, maybe a keto breakfast for a week and then normal meals, and then just ease into it slowly. And the reason I say that is, yes, I did have some problems with this. So what happened was I jumped into it. Like everybody, it's completely new. It's very strange. You sort of tinker around the edges. I was a bit in, a bit out, bit in, bit out, bit in for a little while. And then I went, no, I'm all in. And going into ketosis, when you first go into it, the adaptation phase, because there's a lot that happens as you change your body's system of energy into being a fat burner. There's a lot of changes that take place, and they sort of unwind over a couple of months, really. But heading into ketosis only takes a few days, but it can also affect your sleep to begin with. Most people have improved sleep on a ketogenic diet, but just to begin with, it can leave you sleepless for a little while, which may not be a problem for most people. But if you have a severe mental illness called bipolar 2 disorder, where a hypomanic episode can be triggered by lack of sleep. So say, for example, it would take me, if I had disrupted sleep for 2 or 3 days, I could go into hypomania, which is stepping onto an illness roller coaster that could take 3 months out of my life, right? So that's 2
Wow.
days of sleep. And once I was on that sort of roller coaster of hypomania, I knew where that was going to end. It was going to end in despair. 2 days of lack of sleep, right? So things like jet lag and stuff are a little bit different when you're managing bipolar 2 in your life. So if you're out there and you're thinking about doing this, you need some really good strategies in place for how you might deal with loss of sleep or anything that comes up. I totally believe that people can do this on their own, but easing into it would be a safer way of doing it. So I did that, and I got caught out. I had an episode whilst I was ill. I went off the diet, unfortunately. I missed my own 50th birthday because I was so unwell. That was a disappointment to me. And then when I was sort of coming out of the depression, I thought, I did feel better on that keto diet. And then I managed that adaptation phase better the second time round. Since then, I've been sort of continuously in keto. I started doing a bit of coaching because I sort of took it for granted, I guess, how much I knew about food. Because I'd already been interested. So I sort of knew how many carbs were in milk, and I knew milk had carbs, and I knew nuts were quite heavy on carbs, and I knew I didn't want to eat 17 blocks of cheese in a day and call it a ketogenic diet, And so I started coaching other people through food choices, and that was really interesting, listening to people talk about how they manage their diet, because you're quite right. Did you start keto before you went carnivore?
Yeah, I did. It's such a
Yeah.
common thing. I'm sure you notice it with all of your coaching clients as well.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, isn't it? So my keto diet might have looked nothing like your keto diet.
That's right.
We could have both been doing ketogenic diets that were nothing alike each other. In fact, and so I was coaching, and then so that was sort of 2-3 years. And then I was coaching someone who was having terrible problems with food intolerance. And I'd heard about the carnivore diet being the ultimate elimination diet. And I thought, well, how can I suggest a carnivore diet to this person if I haven't tried it myself? And the wonderful thing about a ketogenic diet was it removed from me, it gave me what you hear in this community called food freedom. I was no longer craving. I was no longer food addicted. So when I began the ketogenic diet, I was like, oh, can I give up toast? I don't know how could I live without toast? It was a real emotional tie. And all that vanished with keto. And one of the things I found through doing keto for 3 years was that food has now become something that I'm very relaxed around, and very much sort of just happily in control of my own intake in a relaxed kind of way. And so if I choose to play with something or experiment with something because I want to play or experiment with something, I kind of can, and it's not a big deal. And if I want to try something, I can. It's not a big deal. It's up to me. There's no carnivore police out there. There's no keto police out there. They're not going to arrest me if I have a sweetener, or I don't know, have some broccoli. Anyways, I had a client and with food intolerances, and I thought, well, I better put myself on the carnivore diet to see what it's like. And so I did, and I've never gone back. It's so easy, and I'm so lazy. But here's an interesting thing, because I was listening to Kerry Mann, who's got a show, Homestead How, and
Homestead
he's
House,
doing the Healing Humanity
Healing Humanity.
documentary.
Yeah.
And he said he'd been keto off and on, but it wasn't until he went carnivore that his mental health symptoms resolved for him, sort of crippling depression. Interestingly for me, when I went carnivore, and I was always in ketosis, always. I was never out of ketosis when I was on keto. I was completely committed to that. I simply do not eat what will give me bipolar 2. I'm not going to eat anything that's giving me bipolar 2. Forget that. But when I went carnivore, I didn't find any difference in my mental health. I didn't find an improvement in my mental health going carnivore. that stayed the same. My joint pain improved. My body recomposition really took off, and it's very, very easy and delicious way to eat. So again, it's that sliding scale. So I know, for example, if I want to keep my clear mental health, I can eat as much broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, or whatever as I like, and that's not going to affect me. But listening to Kerry Mann's story, if I filled Kerry Mann up on broccoli, that is going to affect his mental health. And where people sit with this and what they choose to eat or not eat is such an individual thing. The similarity between the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet in terms of metabolic psychiatry is that both those diets are ketogenic diets. You will be in ketosis on those diets. I find my ketone levels are actually possibly a little bit lower on a carnivore diet, but at the same time, as a menopausal woman, I think probably for the first time in my life, I'm actually getting a really good amount of protein. I'm not eating a high protein diet. I'm eating carnivore, but it's still a moderate protein diet. So I'm getting about probably 90 grams of protein a day, which isn't a huge amount, but I doubt that I was making 90 grams before, and I certainly feel better for it, and my workouts and the weights that I can move and manage show it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh boy, I'm a little disappointed. I'm going to have to call Dr. Anthony Chafee. I thought he was the carnivore police down there in Australia, Tasmania. He's not rolling up to your house to try to take away your carnivore card. He's not doing his job. I have to reach out to him.
No, I was thinking it's funny you should mention him, because I was thinking about him this morning, because this goes down to the. So look, I've said that my mantra is how good can I get it, right? But my other one is N equals 1. And if you read those scientific literature and you go, how many people were in this study? And it goes N equals 200, which means that 200 people were in the study. Well, I like to think that I'm N equals 1. So I can eat broccoli, no problems. You might have some problems with broccoli. And I was listening to Dr. Anthony Chafee, who's a neurosurgeon and an integrative medicine practitioner and also a carnivore. And they were talking about whether you should be including organ meats or not on a carnivore diet. And Dr. Chafee was saying, no, it's fine. Just the steak is fine. The steak's all good. The steak is fine. I really believe when you make changes to your body, it's really useful sometimes to measure, so you know if the experiment that you're trying is getting the results that you're looking for. So I recently did a full blood panel, and it turns out that I was low to the point of deficiency in folate. Now, some people metabolize folate better than others. Perhaps I'm just someone who does it poorly. Either way, the fix is I need to eat, more sources of food with folate. And for some reason, when I went carnivore, I didn't mean to do this. I was just enjoying my steak so much that I'd stopped eating eggs, right? And I wasn't eating as much liver. So I've just put back liver and eggs into my diet in a bigger way, because I want to move that folate number up. But the point of me telling that story is that, I am looking at my measurements and I am deciding of those. When you have a story like mine, where your trust in the medical system becomes broken, and that's over in things like not being given the opportunity to give informed consent about side effects of medications that I was given without being told what the full side effects were. And my trust in the medical system got broken to a degree. So what that means now is that I question everything independently. If you have a doctor that you trust, great, fantastic. But there's no reason to switch your own brain off as well. You can still learn about stuff. You can still measure. Yes, I know what my HbA1c is. Yes, I know what my fasting insulin is. I know these things because they're my markers of health, and I'm tracking my markers of health. And so if Dr. Chafee doesn't need to eat liver and eggs to keep his folate up, excellent. And I think a lot of people are in that category. Me personally, I need to work a little bit harder to make sure I get that folate in. So very individual, the diet choices.
Well said. I've mentioned this several times. Dr. Peter Bruckner at one of the low carb conferences that I was at, he's in Australia as well. He's
Yeah, fantastic. I've met him. Love
amazing, and
him.
he's hilarious too. He's a super funny guy. I really like visiting with him. But anyway, he gets on stage and says something like, "What's the best high quality study that you can have?" And everybody in the audience says, "Oh, it's like a meta analysis of a randomized controlled trial." He's, "No, it's an N of one. If you're the N of one, if it's you, then no other trials matter. It's your own lived experience." So I'm really glad that you said that and mentioned that everybody it kind of has to find what works best for them, as long as it's kind of in that ketogenic umbrella as far as mental health goes. We have talked about some lifestyle practices. We talked about light. We talked about food, obviously. Tell us about something you briefly mentioned there, which was exercise. What do you like to see people do as far as mental health and exercise go?
Me personally, I live about an hour.
Can hear you. It just went low.
So what do I like to do in terms of exercise? Well, I'm sort of a bit boom and bust sometimes, and I have trouble with consistency, but I live about an hour's walk away from my workplace. And so I like to walk in the mornings, and I was doing that walk really quite quickly at, like, I think I got it down to about 48 minutes. Oh, yeah. And then I realized, actually, for my mental health, and this is not bipolar management now, this is just a human being wanting to live a happy life. I was actually better off turning off the podcasts for a start in that morning walk, putting on some music or some walking meditations, taking it a little bit slower, swinging my arms and enjoying that morning sunrise, So for me, one of the most positive exercise things I have is that walk. It's just beautiful. It's, I have a rule that I'm not allowed to think about work problems or any problems. And yet it's astonishing how often the solution comes to me on that walk. And they've done studies on that, about the increase in divergent thinking, the creative divergent thinking that comes with a walking practice. So it's, there's sort of science back there a bit. In terms of strength training, it's really important to maintain your muscle mass, especially at my age. We're losing muscle mass quickly. I want to be strong when I'm old. So I really do need to look out for my muscle mass. So I like to swing around kettlebells. I don't like isometric exercises. I like something that moves. So, but I've stopped spending money on gyms and going to gyms and signing up at gyms. They took my money and I never went. So that was not a good investment. But if I can get up in my own lounge room and I do probably 3 or 4 times a week, 30, 40 minutes of kettlebells and bodyweight exercise.
Great. And
that's sort of the icing on the cake. But other things that I think you'll be interested in from your practice is, one of the other ones I adopted along the way was red light therapy. And so there I am, bipolar 2, single mum, poor as you like, can't work full time. How do I afford red light therapy? Well, I actually did it with, you can buy the big lamps. You don't have to buy the setup. And so I set myself up a rig with the big lamps like they use for raising quail or in clinics dealing with arthritis pain. And I just built this rig, and I lie under the red light with a soundtrack in my ears of beach waves. And the radiant light and the sound of the waves, I tell my kids, mum's off to the beach now. And I guess in terms of lifestyle work, I think when our lives are difficult, and this is even in bipolar days, when our lives are difficult, joy and calmness are even more precious, and they can be very, very hard to find, and sometimes in the worst of those bipolar moments, perhaps impossible to find. But when they're not impossible to find, I urge people to find them and make room for them, and if that's getting sweaty over a kettlebell and feeling tough because you've just lifted 24-kilo swing, then get tough and do it. If that's what makes you feel, if that's what gives you joy, then do those things, because I think they're the things that make our lives the kind of places that we want to live in. Yeah.
I love that. That's lovely advice. And it sounds amazing to go to the beach, just chill out the way you do. I love that. Okay, talking about the Fresh Start Award, tell us when you first heard about the award. Did you have any reservations about, the application process, or did you know it was something you definitely wanted to do? And then what was it like to get the news that you'd actually won?
Well, the Metabolic Mind Fresh Start Award. So I studied Georgia Eads Ketogenic clinical diet course. I guess probably only a year ago. And I sign up as I was getting more into metabolic psychiatry over the last few years, I've been signing up for more websites and newsletters and just keeping abreast of what was happening. So because I'd done that ketogenic diet course, I actually got a newsletter that told me about the Metabolic Mind Award. I read it, I thought, goodness, that sounds like me. I was already working as a peer worker, so I was out and fully disclosing my story, which is, it's a choice moment of, am I going to tell this story publicly? Because there is a complete stigma still about mental illness. But I'd already made that choice to disclose a couple of years earlier, so I didn't have that reservation about this award. I was happy to disclose and be out there, and I was very lucky that I'd been up to James Cook University where they're doing the ketogenic trial. I met Professors Zoltan Sarne and Carlo Longatano in JCU where they're doing the ketogenic trial on 100 people, an RCT up there, which is just amazing. And so I was able to build on, some of the experience that I had and moving into the research field of my own work. And so I wrote the application. My youngest child helped me edit up a video. I submitted a poem with my application because that's the kind of weirdo I am. And I'd written one about a ketogenic journey, as you do, and put some video images to that. So we sent that all along. Lots of tech issues getting that uploading. Thanks, internet connection people out there. And then waited and heard that I'd got it, and absolutely delighted. For me, well, look, I'm sitting here on this podcast today because you saw who got that Metabolic Mind Award. So for me, everything that I do, including this Metabolic Mind Award, is now me wanting to build on each layer that comes in to continue talking about this. I just feel absolutely compelled. I just want every single person who has bipolar disorder to don't give up your doctor, don't give up your medication schedule, don't change any of it. There's no risk. Just try something new along the side. You don't have to throw the mainstream medical model out the window, but you can try something new along the side. So the Metabolic Mind award is another thing for me. It's brought me to your podcast. It's brought me other opportunities, and I just keep on building and keep on talking. And I send people to that website. Their website is growing and growing, and it is the Metabolic Mind website, if you go to it, is a really lovely place to touch in on links to other research. Not only research that the Bazooki Group has funded, but links in that will help you find. If you're sitting back thinking, oh, I don't know, it all sounds a bit miraculous. I don't know that that's right. Then Metabolic Mind website, great one to go along to, and just have a read of what's actually happening. And there's some lived experience stories there too, where people, the most extraordinary stories. I mean, what I've been through is a drop in an ocean compared to the healing in the psychiatric conditions that I've heard. It's just astonishing. It
It
is.
really is.
My
Yeah.
jaw's on the floor again, and I'm just feel a sense of almost like compulsion of just healing really is possible. And, you know, adopting a ketogenic lifestyle had its squiggles and wiggles and ups and downs and getting used to, and it wasn't all clear sailing and it wasn't all completely easy. But maintaining a ketogenic lifestyle, oh, that's easy. Yeah, that's what is not even a problem. I just, things that used to tempt me that don't even appear, like it's so easy to maintain it. Have you got time for a little anecdote? Just
Of
something that
course,
I heard from
absolutely.
Ian Campbell. So I was listening to Ian Campbell, who did a study in Edinburgh, a pirate trial of the ketogenic diet. And what happened? What happened was he got great results and wonderful changes in people's metabolic health as well as psychiatric outcomes. So, fabulous, the normal fabulous story that happens when you mix severe mental illness and ketogenic diets, that all happened. But one of the criticisms about a ketogenic diet is that people go, oh, it's too hard. People won't be able to adhere to that. It's too difficult. And I was listening to an interview that Ian Campbell had done, and he said that when he got to the end of his study, they were meant to be doing a washout period. So the people who'd been on the ketogenic diet were meant to do a washout and go back to a normal diet, as part of the end of the study. And I think it was, oh, don't quote me, although it's out on the internet, so now it's quoted. But I think it was a third of people refused. They refused to do the washout. They felt so good on the ketogenic diet and what they were doing and had such great effects that they refused to do the washout at the end of the study. So, there's things that I can do from a lived experience perspective in this space. I went to a lecture on implementation science recently, and they said that there's normally a 17-year lag between something happening in a study and getting down to clinical practice. 17-year
Too long.
lag.
Too long.
Well, yeah, so my job in the world is to look at some of that translational research stuff and go, how can we pick up that lag? And if one of the criticisms about a ketogenic diet is that it's hard to maintain or adhere to, that's some of the space that I personally would like to get into. I would like to be talking to people. Why is it that people who are doing this diet talk about food freedom? People who are looking at the diet from the outside see it as a restricted diet. People who are living the diet on the inside talk about it being a diet of freedom. Now, to me, there's some work that we could do there in the lived experience space, research work that we could do in the lived experience space of getting that message out. So, that's some of the things I want to do. This is not a difficult diet at all to maintain. But if you haven't done it yet, you probably won't believe me because you're probably still in the grip of wanting sweets and wanting starches. But it goes away.
Yeah. It really does. If you're listening to this and you're hearing the word food freedom and wondering what the hell is Shannon talking about food freedom, I can tell you it is amazing. I'm just sitting here thinking like it's 2:30 in the afternoon. I've taken clients and 6 in the morning. I maybe 15-20 minutes ago I felt my tummy rumble a little bit and I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't eaten all day. I'm fasting and I feel fine and it's totally just fine. In a few hours, I will have steak or a chuck roast cooked in broth or something absolutely delicious, and I can't wait. And that'll be great. But to have food freedom, like I never had that. You're not tied to food, and you're right. Like it might seem difficult now, but there will be a day that you do not want sweets, you do not want chips. They don't sound good, they don't taste good. I always love the anecdote of somebody having their very first cheat, and they have the chocolate cake, and they're looking forward to it. They eat this cake, and they're like, it didn't even taste good and I felt terrible and I couldn't sleep for 2 days and my anxiety came back. Like it was not even going to taste the same. So I really love that message of, maybe the transition is going to be challenging, but maintaining a ketogenic diet really is not that hard. I love that point. Yeah, I love that point. I think it just cut out again.
It really is
Yep.
easy to maintain that diet. It really is. Yeah.
It's super easy. I'm like you. I wish more people would give it a try. But I do think that your story and sharing this and being vocal about it is going to help a lot of people. So I hope to see you on many more podcasts, and I hope that you continue to get to share your story. I'm so looking forward to each one of you using the money that you got. I know all of you are going to be extremely resourceful, and that money is going to go a very, very long way because of all your passion and everything that you want to do. And so, Shannon, I've really appreciated this conversation. I really love your passion, and definitely I think the listener will really appreciate also not only just your story, but the practical tips and tricks that they can take and apply in their own lives. But for now, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Well, I'm not on social media. People can't find me and connect with my work. I've taken on a really challenging new role, and I'm trying to get myself to the point where I can get up some projects that I want to do in the workspace. So I'm really just taking coaching clients. I'm really not really taking them. Sometimes people ask me, and I do it, but I'm really not doing it. Not at the moment. So
Gotcha.
no, perhaps they can't connect with me. Although I have just joined Mia Mendez's keto group. So she's got a group for newbies. So if you're thinking about it, she's got a group for people who are thinking about it, where there'll be some people like me and others who are going along who are more experienced hands. So look up Mia Mendez. And you can join some groups there. You've already mentioned Donica for Transformation Evoked. So there's some, and Professor Peter Bruckner here in Australia. If you're in Australia, the Defeat Diabetes program will take you all the way from a few carbs to right down to a keto level of coaching and practical good tips. And obviously, hint there, it's called Defeat Diabetes. But so if you've got a problem with that way, that'll get resolved along the way, I hope. Lots of coaches and things out there, not what I'm doing yet, but I think I'm going to be active in this space.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, we've hosted all of those people on our show, so we'll be sure to tag that. If anything ever changes and you want a platform to be tagged, just let us know. But for now, Shannon, thank you so very much for taking the time to be on our show today and share your story. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. It's been an honor to host you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.